Welcome to MTM Update. It's the English-speaking format in which we take a broader view on global media topics all around the world. And it's a pleasure to welcome Mary Wilkinson. She's Head of Editor Content of BBC World News. Mary Wilkinson, how did Corona had an effect on all of our lives this year? But how do you see the effect in your news program?
Well, I mean, it had so many effects, it's quite difficult to know where to start. But right at the very beginning, so going back to March this year, we had to move very, very fast to work out how we were going to socially distance. And anybody who's ever been in a television newsroom knows that they can be very packed, very crowded places with lots of people, I was going to say shouting and yelling, but talking loudly and, just being very close together. So we had to simplify our schedule. We restricted the number of people allowed in the building. We did the things that every other office in the world has done, which is one-way systems and lots of hand sanitizers, lots of mask wearing in certain parts of the building. And it was amazingly fast. I think everybody found it difficult to begin with, but now it just feels normal. And we've gradually been able to put some of the programmes that we lost and some of the complexity that we felt had to go at the beginning. We've managed to reinstate that back into the schedule, which is a big relief. But probably the biggest change is there are a lot fewer guests coming into the building, so we're doing interviewees over video conference in exactly the same way that I'm doing this interview. And that's been a bit of a revelation because we've found that it is so much easier to get people to come on air and to respond quickly. The calibre of the guests that we're getting is definitely higher than it was. Possibly because people are based at home, they don't have to commute, and they're willing to just jump on a video conference call for 10 minutes and do a quick interview. So that's been a real bonus. And then the other difference is just the way we operate out in the field. I've been impressed by how much on-the-ground news gathering we're still able to do. Everything is sort of heavily risk assessed. But we're lucky at the BBC that we've got such a big network of correspondents and producers based around the world. So we don't have the problem of having to fly people from London to wherever. We've got teams on the ground, and that's made a huge difference. So it's meant that our coverage of coronavirus has been completely global. You name it, we've been able to cover Brazil, Mexico, right through to South Korea, China, and across Europe, right down to the tip of Africa.
I want to talk to you about the network you have, because we had Corona now. It was a real digital push in the media. But the digitalization took place much longer, and the news formats, they kind of have trouble with the pace of the digitalization and still keeping the accuracy of news. So how do you cope with that? And can you tell us a little bit about the network you built?
Yeah, I mean, I'm head of editorial content both for our 24-hour television news channel, but also for the BBC News website outside of the UK. So we, both digital and television, work very closely together, and all our correspondents work, they have to file on all platforms, including radio, as well as digital and TV. I mean, we like to be responsive and to make sure that on our digital products, whether it's our app or our website or our social channels, that we're there, when there's a big story breaking, that we're up there with the rest of the pack. providing updates, but we don't rush to be first. It's much more important to be accurate. We've got very good live pages now, and throughout the coronavirus or the pandemic, we've had a live page going, which is just a really good way of updating and being very responsive. And we do have a policy of digital first. So if somebody gets access to news, it goes out on a digital platform first, with radio and television following swiftly behind.
Can you explain a little bit the word live page? Is it a home page with live content on it?
Yeah, the live page is very prominent whether you land on our news website on a desktop or whether you use the news app or go online. It's one of the sort of top things that you see. And once you're in the live page, there'll be a team of 3 to 4 people who are curating it. And it's a stream of updates. So it'll be pulling in stories from social, from our own correspondence. Sometimes we will reference other people's stories if they get a major breakthrough. It will have video, it will have text, it will have graphics. And it's, from a user point of view, it's a very good way, at the end of the day, if you're interested in, what's happened today, what's the progress on a vaccine, what are the infection rates like near me or where I'm planning to go on holiday, you can just scroll through it and get it, everything that you want to know that has happened today will sit in that live stream.
Speaking of live events or breaking news, everybody can produce live content now. You just need your iPhone. When there's a game-changing event, like, for example, the votes in Belarus, you knew that the votes were going to take place, but a lot of journalists just didn't get into the country. How do you cope with that? Are you using other sources of people who do their videos, and how do you save the quality?
Well, we did have reporters in, but also we've got a lot of Russian language journalists who won't have been in there, and it's all the old-fashioned journalistic methods, phone calls, contacting people online, having sources, and being on the ground as well, although frequently in countries like Belarus. Well, probably actually for the election in Belarus, it was quite easy to get people to talk to you. But, you can be operating in some countries where it's very difficult to speak to members of the public because they fear for their own safety. So having a correspondent there, you can learn a certain amount, but you can frequently learn more through other means, and it might be talking to the diaspora or talking to NGOs or refugee groups outside of the country that have contacts and networks in the country and safe ways of contacting them and speaking to them. And, if we can tap into that, then that's often a better way of finding out the experience of citizens within particular countries than actually turning up as a very sort of prominent TV crew that can't really speak to anybody. I mean, North Korea would be a classic example. It's very difficult to send a team into North Korea and actually learn anything other than what the North Korean government wants to show you. So you have to find other ways of trying to find out what's going on.
Do you do video calls more often now than you did 3 years ago?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly since the pandemic, it's I couldn't put a percentage on it, but it's an awful lot higher, and we are less worried about what the audience will think about it. I think the audience, of course, it's much nicer if you've got a good quality picture, but they're very understanding. If the person at the other end is very pertinent to a particular story and they've got something to say and it's in the moment, then people are very forgiving of a slightly weak video signal. And even, I mean, to me, I think the audio is often more important. You really need to be able to hear what somebody's saying, and if it's a sort of low resolution picture, it doesn't matter so much. But again, depending on the story, you would hope that you get good audio, but sometimes you're even prepared to tolerate bad audio just to hear it from somebody who's actually living the experience or able to break the news.
Do you regard that as a positive push of the pandemic? That there is a greater tolerance to the content of what is said than to the picture?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see whether it continues beyond the stage where people understand why we're doing it the way we're doing it. But the other thing that's happened is the technology has just got better, and the sort of people that might be called upon to do an interview from their home, I know I've done it myself. People are investing in better cameras and better, more expensive broadband packages and better microphones. So actually, it's we're finding that it's people are helping us. We don't need to invest so much in expensive kit ourselves, because it's quite remarkable how many people out there who might be interviewed do have access to quite high spec cameras and microphones.
Do you also think that people regard it as a more authentic way of broadcasting?
I hope so. I mean, I think because it's so much more responsive, it's immediate. I think that does lend something to just giving the audience the sense that they're being allowed in and given the most up-to-date news, using every tool available.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit more about BBC Global News and your finances. The BBC is known as a public-funded station, but BBC Global News is actually not.
Yes, BBC is very complicated, and you'll find that most people in the BBC don't really understand how my part of the BBC is funded. But we are entirely commercial, so we're funded through advertising revenue and distribution revenue. And we operate outside of the UK because inside the UK the BBC is funded by a licence fee. So BBC World News, the TV channel, is not available in the UK because we carry advertising. And the BBC News website, there are two different versions. I mean, essentially it's fed by the same stream, but I look after the version that is available outside of the UK, and that carries advertising, whereas inside the UK, if you log on to the BBC News website, you don't see any advertising. And the reason for that, it goes back to 1991 when the BBC it could see that, quite frankly, they could see what CNN was achieving, and realised that having an international 24-hour, 7-day-a-week television news channel was probably the way that audiences wanted to consume their news. And the BBC had been doing World Service Radio for a very long time and built up a big audience, but wanted to branch off and have as well as having an English language radio service, wanted to have an English language TV news service. And the government at the time wasn't convinced, so the BBC decided that, this is important, we'll find a way of funding it. And the only route to do it at the time was to do it commercially, via the commercial route. So yes, you've got BBC World Service, which is funded by the licence fee and a bit of government funding, but that's 42 languages, radio, digital, and some television stations in languages, but not in English. And then you've got BBC Global News, which is the commercial English language news services, both on web and television, which are commercially funded. So it's complicated.
The debate about the news in Germany, it's always connected to trust, because a lot of people kind of lost their trust. Aren't you afraid that because you get money from some companies who place commercials, how do you convince people that it doesn't go together?
Because we've got very strict advertising and sponsorship guidelines, which we publish. They're publicly available. If you want to Google them, you will find them, BBC Advertising and Sponsorship Guidelines. And it's, our reputation and the fact that we are one of the most trusted news brands in the world is really precious to us. We know that if you lose trust, it takes a lot longer to win it back than losing it. So we're extremely careful in everything we do. There is a complete divide between the advertising side and the editorial content. We know that the brands that like to advertise with us because we've got this reputation for trusted journalism. So they wouldn't do anything to undermine that. And I think in most markets, people understand that you need a source of funding, and they understand this sort of church-state divide, that editorial is independent and advertisers advertise around the editorial. And it's, we're very grateful to those brands that do advertise with us, because it's very tough at the moment. I mean, particularly since the pandemic, advertising has taken a big hit, and our biggest category of advertising is travel and tourism. So you can imagine what's happened to that. And it's very difficult to see when it's going to come back. I mean, we hope that towards the end of 2021, we're going to see it coming back. But we don't know yet. We need to see how things progress with the vaccine. So, yeah, it's advertising. It really isn't that difficult. We find it, we're confident in our own procedures, and we find it quite easy to maintain a distinction between what is editorial and what is advertising.
Speaking of the dependency, all of the channels are using platforms like Facebook, YouTube, the social media platforms, and they have their own. It is kind of a problem, because you put content on something which you can't edit as your own. Do you think that we will, that our system will come over these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, so I will say the same thing that any publisher, broadcaster says about social media. So it's incredibly useful for marketing and for staying relevant and for reaching audiences that aren't coming to our own platform. We would love it, the social platforms, to be more effective at driving people back to the BBC, into our trusted environment. We're realistic, some social platforms are better than others at doing that. We like the fact that increasingly some of the social platforms are prepared to do content deals with us. So they're actually paying for our content, and we're very happy to do that. We think, that gets us brand recognition, but also it brings us revenue. And yeah, we will constantly monitor what's happening, and we've got a huge following for BBC World on Facebook. It's really important to us. I mean, I should have checked the numbers, but last time I looked, I think it was about 46 million people. Instagram is growing very fast. It's now about 16 million, and it's certainly growing faster than Facebook is. I wouldn't be surprised if at some stage Instagram overtakes Facebook. But yeah, Twitter is important, LinkedIn is important, and we'll just keep monitoring the situation. And we're very interested in, do we get attribution if people do see our content on these social platforms? So if they don't realise it's the BBC, then it's probably not worth our while being there. If they do realise it's the BBC, then yes, it's good because you might be reaching new audiences.
Thank you, Mary Wilkinson, Head of Editorial Content at the BBC Global News, for giving us an insight about the digitalization in news media. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm kind of glad that we didn't talk about the Brexit today.
Yeah, well done.